Boring history for sleep. The peace treaty that took 30 years to finish writing. Section 1. You open your eyes, not in a moment, but gradually. As if drifting into a painting, the world around you is hazy, grey-blue, with the light of a candle flickering against rough stone. Outside, the year is 1618. Inside, Europe is already halfway broken. The Holy Roman Empire, a sprawling quilt of territories more imagined than united, is holding itself together with wax seals and whispered prayers. The Peace of Augsburg, remember that? No one else does either. It was supposed to keep Catholics and Protestants from clawing at each other's throats. That lasted about as long as a warm loaf of bread. And now you're here, in a place and time where tension is baked into every church bell. The 30 Years' War is just beginning, though nobody calls it that yet. It's just the crisis. One more in a long line, a little local fuss in Bohemia, some Protestants tossing Catholic officials out a window in Prague, the defenestration. Funny word. Less funny when you realize it means throwing people out of buildings. You follow the scent of smoke into the heart of Central Europe. What starts as a religious squabble in the Habsburg lands unspools into a continent-wide tangle of dynasties, churches, mercenaries, and motives so layered that even the kings writing the orders don't always know why they're doing it. You're in a world run by letters and blood. And there are a lot more letters than blood. But make no mistake, the war is brutal. Whole towns vanish. Armies live off the land, which is a pretty way of saying they steal food and burn fields. The soldiers are underpaid and overarmed. The peasants can't tell which side is worse. Neither can you. There's a rhythm to it though. Skirmish, retreat, letter, treatise, a bit of diplomacy, a siege or two. Winter comes and everything slows, then spring and it starts again, like a bad habit that stretches on for years, and then decades. But for now, the war has just begun, and already it feels endless. You drift from battlefield to battlefield, not by horse or map, but by mood. There's the Battle of White Mountain, a disastrous mess for the Bohemians. Their king, Frederick V, loses it all. They call him the Winter King because that's how long his reign lasts. One season. There are Swedes in the south now, the French in the Rhineland, Spanish troops marching through German fields. No one remembers who's supposed to be protecting whom. Alliances are made out of convenience and broken out of boredom. It isn't just Protestants versus Catholics anymore. It's kings versus cousins, armies versus harvests, generals against sleep. It all blends together into a fog of gunpowder and parchment. But even as cannons roar and villages burn, there are always two things moving slower than anything else: diplomacy and paper. And those are the things you'll be following. You pass a cart full of letters. Each one is bound for a different castle, chancellery, or council hall. Most will arrive weeks too late. Some will be read by the wrong person. A few will be ignored entirely, but a handful will spark something. A meeting, a proposal, a reply. The beginnings of something resembling peace, though no one will admit it yet. You glide above them all, unseen. You see the archdukes writing in the glow of candlelight, the ministers debating over maps so outdated they show kingdoms that no longer exist, the soldiers shivering outside empty farmhouses. The war feels static, but every month brings new confusion. And in the distance, far beyond the burning cities and broken alliances, is Westphalia. You don't know it yet, but that's where you're heading. So are the letters, so are the hopes of exhausted empires. But first, 30 years must pass. 30 years of shifting front lines, forgotten treaties, and negotiations that lead nowhere. You're in the thick of it now, but not in a way that jolts or alarms, more like the slow melting of a candle in a silent room. Time is moving, but sideways. The war will end, eventually, but not because one side wins. This war will end because everyone is too tired to keep going. And so, you close your eyes again, but only halfway, and let the lull of history carry you. Deeper into a war that stretches far past reason, and into a peace that takes nearly as long to write as the war took to fight. Section 2. You're drifting again, sliding quietly from battle smoke to candlelight, from broken cities to polished halls where polished people try to make sense of senselessness. You find yourself gliding across maps that don't agree with themselves, borders drawn in shaky ink, kingdoms written in Latin, German, and the half-forgotten grammar of dynasties. This isn't a two-sided war, that would be far too neat. No, this is a hydra of conflict. If you came looking for clear lines, Catholic versus Protestant, empire versus liberty, you'll have to let go of that. You're better off thinking of it like a broken music box. Dozens of gears turning in and out of sync. Sometimes they align, mostly they grind. The Holy Roman Empire, supposed to be the central authority, is more like a poorly moderated group chat. Everyone's talking, no one's listening, and the Habsburgs keep trying to control it while everyone else passive-aggressively ignores them. On one side, loosely speaking, you have the Catholic Habsburgs, running the Austrian heartlands and eyeing every Protestant spark as a threat to divine order. But swing your gaze to the north and you'll see Protestant princes wary of being swallowed by imperial ambition. To the west, the French are Catholic but hate the Habsburgs even more than they hate heresy. So they fund Protestant armies. The enemy of my enemy is apparently a great investment. The Spanish, cousins to the Austrian Habsburgs, get dragged in. The Dutch, already at war with Spain for independence, stay in the fight. The Danes poke their head in, regret it, and leave. The Swedes, under Gustavus Adolphus, blonde, bold, battlefield genius, arrive with a vengeance and Protestant fire. It's no longer about religion, it's power, pride, survival, and old grudges that no one wants to let go of. And the alliances, they shift like tides. Bavaria sides with the emperor until it doesn't. Saxony flips when convenient. Even the Pope sends envoys with double meanings. In one dispatch, he blesses peace. In another, he quietly supports more bloodshed. After all, better a tired war than a Protestant peace. You drift through these tangled motives like smoke through rafters, watching generals stare at supply reports, kings consulting astrologers, and diplomats penning letters that say one thing but mean three others. There's no grand strategy here, just a rolling cascade of reaction and retaliation. The war changes shape every few years. Sometimes it's a fight over religion, other times over land or prestige, or the fact that somebody's cousin insulted somebody else's aunt at a wedding 5 years ago. And beneath it all, the people, the farmers, blacksmiths, millers, mothers, just want quiet. You pass them as they huddle in the ruins of homes that were rebuilt, then burned again. They aren't reading the treaties. They don't care who wins. They just want the boots to stop marching through their fields. But the boots keep coming. You visit a battlefield where no one knows why they're still fighting. A captain shrugs. "Orders from above," he says. "Who's above?" someone asks. He doesn't answer. You hover over a village meeting where elders try to guess which army will arrive next. They hide their grain in the forest again. They dig up old coins again. They bury their sons again. Even the soldiers are tired. They desert in droves, turn to robbery, or wander away mid-campaign. Whole units vanish overnight, swallowed by woods and weariness. Mercenaries arrive from every corner of Europe, Italians, Scots, Croats, all chasing coin. Loyalties for fools and nobles. You float above the clutter and churn, and still the war doesn't resolve. No great final battle, no decisive moment. Just slow attrition, like rain wearing down stone. And so peace becomes less of a dream and more of a necessity. Not because one side is victorious, but because they're all bleeding money, men and meaning. Even the great powers are cracking. Spain's silver ships are fewer. France is fighting internal revolts. Sweden stretches its army thin. The Holy Roman Emperor himself sees the writing on the walls of his crumbling palace. The whispers of peace become murmurs. Then meetings, then instructions. Send word, begin talks, somewhere neutral, somewhere slow. You linger on one of those letters. It's not urgent, no rush. It will take weeks to arrive, but it carries a strange weight. Not hope exactly, but fatigue shaped into diplomacy. This war, with all its tangled causes and shifting coalitions, is finally lurching toward the only ending anyone still has the energy for: stopping. And in that slow, reluctant drift toward diplomacy, you find the first real pause. Not victory, just the sound of pens uncapped, scrolls unrolled, and couriers mounting their horses not to deliver declarations of war, but invitations to sit, talk, and maybe, just maybe, be done. Section 3. You're floating now gently over rooftops that haven't been repaired in a decade, across fences half fallen and fields half sown. The war has passed through these places so many times that the grass grows back cautiously, like it's waiting to be trampled again. You pass a village in Saxony. The church doors hang crooked, the bell gone, melted for musket balls 2 winters ago. Children move like shadows, learning early not to draw attention. There's no school anymore, but they know how to spot a foraging patrol and how to vanish into hedgerows. Not every victim of war wears a uniform. In fact, most don't. The common folk, cobblers, widows, goat herds, apothecaries, have no stake in grand causes. They didn't debate theology or map dynastic claims. They just wanted bread to rise and livestock to survive the frost. But history doesn't ask permission when it rolls in like thunder. You drift above them, these silent survivors. In Württemberg, a baker sets a trap door in his cellar, not for valuables, but for himself. In Brandenburg, a weaver marks which soldiers speak what language so she'll know who to hide from. In Alsace, a group of villagers rebuilds their grain mill for the 3rd time. They don't bother painting it this time. Why would they? War has a way of teaching efficiency. You slip into a tiny town on the Elbe River. No more than a dozen houses and a chapel that still stands, miraculously. Inside, a priest is holding mass to an audience of 5. He reads from Psalms, but his eyes look over the door constantly. Not out of fear, just habit. Everyone's developed little habits like that, glancing at the horizon, speaking in whispers, keeping food buried under floorboards. In the margins of this war, entire cultures of caution have formed. And there are more of them. Cities like Magdeburg, once rich, now hollowed out. It was besieged and sacked so thoroughly that travelers later wept at the silence inside its walls. A city of 30,000 reduced to ashes and corpses. No one remembers why it was attacked, only that it burned. You drift further into the countryside where the war didn't come with cannons but with famine. The armies marched through, stripped the land and moved on. But hunger stayed. It nested in barns and snuffed out the weak. When that didn't finish the job, plague followed. One town left a note at its gate. No food, no coin, no sick, only ghosts. Yet in the middle of all this, people still lived. They married. They found ways to laugh quietly. They wrote diaries that no one would publish. They marked time not by rulers or treaties, but by which crops failed and which neighbor didn't return. In a small hill village in the Palatinate, a woman keeps records, not of births or deaths, but of rumors. She writes, "A Swedish officer asked for milk. Said the emperor may sue for peace. Don't believe it. He took the milk and a chicken." You cross into Dutch territory, slightly less scarred but no less wary. The 80 Years' War with Spain bleeds into the 30. Everyone's caught in overlapping histories. Here, people are tired in layers. They've forgotten the names of battles, but they remember the smell of burning grain. And as you watch them endure, without glory, without thanks, you understand the quiet truth beneath all the diplomacy that's about to come. This war doesn't need peace, because kings have had enough. It needs peace because the people beneath the crowns have nothing left to give. Still, they keep giving. A shoemaker in Cologne takes in a child who wandered in from the east. No name, no parents, just frostbitten feet. He gives her a blanket. That's politics too, in its truest form. In Augsburg, a young boy carves small figures from firewood scraps. He sets them on a makeshift shelf, a soldier, a horse, a baker, a woman with a basket. He doesn't name them, he just watches them. Maybe they remind him of something quieter. You keep moving, now slower. The war isn't over, but it's thinned out in places. It's quieter, like a storm moving on, but leaving puddles behind. Somewhere, a scribe prepares paper. A courier oils his saddle. A prince drafts a letter he won't sign for 3 more months. The gears of diplomacy creak to life, but here, in the margins, the people have already decided something more important. Whatever comes next, whether peace or just pause, they'll live it the same way they survived the war. Quietly, carefully, and always ready to dig up the flour hidden under the floor. Section 4. You follow the paper trail. Not metaphorically, literally. Scrolls and folded letters, wax seals and ribbons, messages riding by horse, boat, or bundled in the pockets of sweating messengers crossing mountain passes. Europe, in all its fractured majesty, begins to talk, not with swords this time, but with scripts. It begins with feelers, soft, non-committal phrases, preliminary discussions, exploratory dialogue, strictly unofficial. Every court wants to gauge the others. No one wants to look weak, but everyone's exhausted. Even the strongest kingdoms have cracks now, running through treasuries, morale, and ideology. And so they send letters, lots of them. You drift behind a courier lurching over a frosty road in Thuringia. The letter in his pouch is from a minor Protestant prince to a French envoy. It says little, just a nod, a half invitation to maybe talk, if the weather is right and the terms vague enough. But that's how it starts. Elsewhere, another courier sets off from Vienna, clutching a velvet-lined packet containing a note from Emperor Ferdinand III. It's more formal, a gesture to resume talks that had, in theory, never stopped. Diplomacy, after all, is the art of pretending things aren't broken until they are repaired. The emperor proposes Westphalia, or more accurately, his advisors propose it. 2 cities actually, Münster and Osnabrück. Close enough to be manageable, but separate enough to let hostile delegations avoid eye contact. You follow a French envoy preparing his team. The French, of course, want to look like they're leading without leading. They'll send cardinals, nobles, bureaucrats, and a few lawyers for flavor. Their wagons are heavy with paper, books, wine, and arguments. The Swedes take longer. There's debate back home. Who should represent them? How much leverage do they have left? But eventually, names are chosen and wagons roll. And so it begins. The great European powers, and the medium ones, and even some very tiny ones, start building their delegations. Messengers fan out like a nervous flock of birds, each carrying snippets of intent, requests for safe passage, lists of titles to be recognized, and reminders of who insulted whom 10 years ago. It's slow, painfully so. Every envoy must be given guarantees, safe travel, fair housing, neutral ground. That alone takes months. Then there's funding. Who pays for what? Where do they stay? Are the accommodations equal? What if one side gets better bread or warmer beds? These are not small issues. In diplomacy, comfort equals power. A delegation that sleeps in a damp attic is a delegation that loses face. You drift over the preparations like a feather. In Cologne, tailors stitch uniforms with absurd precision. In Brussels, copyists prepare dossiers of complaints and demands. In Vienna, servants polish silver cutlery for the imperial envoys, who will dine like kings, even while pretending not to be interested in food. By the end of 1643, there are thousands of letters in circulation, all circling around one slow idea: end the war, maybe. And still, the war rumbles on in the background. Soldiers are still dying, towns are still sieged. But more and more, the fighting feels like a background hum to the real movement, the slow ballet of parchment and protocol. You find yourself hovering over a small chancellery in Hamburg. Inside, a clerk sharpens a goose quill and opens a fresh ledger. His job to track who's going to Westphalia and what they'll demand when they get there. He mutters the names under his breath like a litany: France, Spain, Sweden, the Holy Roman Empire, the Dutch Republic, the Papal States, the Swiss Confederacy, the Prince-Bishopric of Cologne, the Electorate of Brandenburg, and on and on. So many players, so many grievances, and yet they're all writing to each other now, carefully, formally, hoping no one notices how desperate they are for the same thing: an end. Not a victory, just an end. As 1644 dawns, the cities of Münster and Osnabrück begin to receive their first official guests. Not full delegations yet, just scouts, secretaries, assistants to assistants. They're there to inspect inns, measure the size of rooms, test the clarity of water, taste the wine, and determine how insulted their masters will be if the chairs are made of pine instead of oak. Meanwhile, letters keep coming. Some are weeks late, others contradict earlier ones. But no matter, the wheels are moving. You hover beside a Catholic abbot as he pens a note to a Swedish counterpart. His hand shakes. Not from age, but from something else. Maybe the strain of writing polite words to a people his side once called heretics. He signs with flourish, then folds, seals, hands it off. Another step toward peace, or toward the illusion of it. Either way, you drift along in the slipstream of ink and intention, floating toward Westphalia, where the war will end the same way it began, not with clarity, but with paperwork. Section 5. You arrive in Westphalia not with a bang, but with a sigh. The year is 1644, and the cities of Münster and Osnabrück are bracing for the least thrilling invasion in their history. An onslaught of diplomats, assistants, translators, cooks, stable hands, scribes, priests, envoys, servants, and that one guy who always travels with a printing press. The war is still technically raging, but here in these two modest German towns, a different kind of campaign begins. This one involves paperwork instead of muskets, wine instead of gunpowder, and ego management instead of siege ladders. You drift over Münster first. The air smells of ink and boiled beef. A row of dusty inns lines the cobbled road, hastily converted into makeshift embassies. Flags flap lazily in the breeze. Each one tells a story of a different delegation: France, the Papal States, Spain. Every corner of the fractured continent now has some representative squeezed into these narrow lanes. But it's Osnabrück where the real tension simmers. That's where the Protestant delegations are gathering: Sweden, the Dutch, a parade of German princes, each with their own coat of arms and their own list of historical grudges. Why two cities? Because the sides refuse to meet under the same roof. Catholics wouldn't negotiate with Protestants directly, so they split the difference, literally, and picked two towns. Messengers would shuttle between them, carrying notes and insults on horseback, sometimes in the same envelope. It's not efficient, but it's the only option. You settle briefly inside a guest house in Osnabrück. A Swedish secretary is unpacking trunks filled with ledgers, correspondence, and small barrels of schnapps. Across the hallway, a Dutch envoy complains about the lack of decent cheese. Downstairs, an innkeeper argues with a Spanish agent about stable space for 6 overfed horses. This is diplomacy, 17th century style. Less glamorous than the portraits suggest. Every delegation comes armed, not with weapons, but with grievances. Centuries' worth. France brings lists of territories they want to see weakened. The Swedes want recognition, land, and compensation. The Spanish are hoping to maintain something, anything, of their crumbling influence. The German states, meanwhile, want autonomy, religious freedom, and a little peace and quiet. But before they talk peace, they must talk logistics. Who sits where? Who speaks first? What order the coats of arms are hung in? Whether the emperor is referred to as His Imperial Majesty or something slightly less pompous. These debates take weeks, then months. You follow a courier riding between Münster and Osnabrück. He carries nothing urgent, just an update on seating protocol. It will take him 2 days to deliver it, 2 days to return. No one will act on it for another 2 weeks. At this pace, the war might end itself out of boredom. But there's progress, even if you have to squint to see it. You hover in a grand hall in Münster. French diplomats are inspecting the chandelier. One points out that the Swedes might be offended if theirs is smaller. A servant takes notes. The chandelier will be swapped, reluctantly. Elsewhere, the Swedes are arguing over a map. Not the borders themselves, yet, but the margins. Where should the annotations go? Is this line too thick? Is that river still a river, or just a muddy memory? You realize quickly, nothing is simple here. Every inch of space, every word spoken, every raised eyebrow becomes part of the negotiation. And yet, slowly, the two towns begin to breathe with rhythm. Couriers leave every morning at dawn. Horses clip-clop across the wet roads, hooves echoing like a metronome. Documents pass hands, are translated, reworded, returned. No one speaks directly, but everyone speaks constantly. You pass by a Jesuit priest and a Lutheran scholar in the same bakery, silently deciding to not argue about anything for once. Even theology takes a nap in Westphalia. The delegates start recognizing one another by scent and silhouette. That's the Swedish guy who smells like smoked meat. That's the French cardinal who always wears violet. That's the Spanish diplomat who snores in public. They all grow familiar, but never quite friendly. No one wants to be the first to say peace. Saying it would mean wanting it too much. And that's weakness. So they talk around it. They talk about trade routes, succession laws, religious toleration, canal taxes, tolls, and fishing rights in rivers most of them have never seen. But it's all circling one quiet goal: stop the bleeding, put this 30-year nightmare to bed. And so you remain here in Westphalia, floating from chimney to chimney, parchment to parchment, watching as the war tries to negotiate its own ending, one insulted envoy and delayed message at a time. No cannonballs, no fanfare, just the slow unfolding of something that, if squinted at from the right angle, might someday be called peace. Section 6. You drift into the meeting rooms now, where things should be happening, but mostly they're not. The war has sent its noise elsewhere. What remains here in Westphalia is quiet, stiff and slow. The sound of shuffling papers, creaking chairs, and the occasional sigh from a man in robes who's been waiting to speak for 3 weeks. Not because of any complex debate, but because no one can agree who goes first. Welcome to the room where it didn't happen. There are no dramatic speeches, no sudden reconciliations, just long hours of sitting, stewing, and protocol. Protocol that grinds every conversation into dust before it even starts. You hover over a meeting table in Münster. It's not much of a meeting. The Spanish envoys have arrived, but the French delegation hasn't entered yet. Why? Because the seating chart still isn't finalized. The French don't want to sit lower than the imperial representatives. The papal delegation demands precedence, but refuses to share a table with heretics. The Swedes are willing to sit anywhere, but only if everyone agrees that they're now a great power, which half the room finds hilarious. And so, hours go by, then days. Some delegates pass the time writing poetry. Others play cards. A few scribble passive-aggressive letters to their home governments, complaining about the food, the cold, the draftiness, and the insult of being made to wait behind a bishop from a territory the size of a small orchard. In Osnabrück, things are slightly more productive, but only slightly. Protestant states are used to being marginalized, so their expectations are lower. Still, they're bickering too, mainly over whether the Dutch should even be here. After all, they've been fighting Spain for 80 years, and this war technically isn't theirs. Except, of course, that it is, because everything is tangled. And it turns out everyone brought receipts, literally. Chests full of documents, maps, manifestos, letters dating back decades, even centuries. Each side trying to prove they were wronged first, that they held the land before it was taken, that they had the right to rule, that their grievances weren't just real, but righteous. No one throws punches, but a diplomat's insult can cut deeper than steel if delivered with the right tone. "Ah yes," says one Austrian delegate dryly, "we recall your principality's long history of independence. From 1612 to 1613, was it?" Smiles. Silence. Scribbling. The mood swings between passive aggression and sheer inertia. You watch a Swedish envoy argue for an entire afternoon about a word in a Latin clause that could be translated as guarantee or protection, depending on the inflection. He insists it be clarified. His counterpart insists it stay ambiguous. They both claim this is the foundation of lasting peace. Neither budges. Every hour of these negotiations is padded with rituals. Titles must be pronounced in full. Letters opened in a specific order. Clerks must stand when certain envoys enter the room. There's a man whose only job is to ensure that everyone bows at the appropriate depth to each representative, depending on rank, religion, and whether their country still technically exists. And if that sounds absurd, remember this. In a room of worn-out aristocrats and touchy old monarchies, a misplaced bow can derail a treaty. So they bow carefully, but don't mistake the slowness for failure. This is what peace looks like when it's negotiated by people who hate each other, but fear dying more. You follow one of the scribes out into the corridor. He collapses onto a bench, exhausted. Not from labor, but from waiting. He's copied the same clause 8 times today, each with a slightly different phrasing. None will be used. He closes his eyes and mutters, "Maybe tomorrow they'll agree on something." The hope isn't bright, it's a flickering candle, but it's still there. Meanwhile, outside the halls, the city adapts. Inns raise prices, bakers add more loaves. Tailors learn the flags of each delegation so they can offer matching waistcoats. Children trade stories about the strange men from France who drink wine like water and wear velvet in summer. Westphalia becomes its own universe, sealed off from the gunfire beyond, insulated by manners and posturing. And inside this quiet theatre, the actors continue their strange performance, staring at each other across long oak tables, arguing about who stands where, delaying talks not because they want to, but because moving forward means making a decision, and no one wants to move first. It's not failure, it's friction. You watch them stare, you watch them shuffle, you listen to hours of discussion that go nowhere, and then, one evening, just before the candles burn out, someone suggests something small, a meeting. Not formal, not binding, just a dinner. No titles, no speeches, just a chance to speak without scribes listening. No one agrees outright, but the room goes quiet. That, in this place, counts as momentum. Section 7. You slide quietly into the next day, where the real diplomacy isn't done in the meeting halls, but in the in-between. At the dinners, in the gardens, in the corridors, thick with the smell of damp wool and old paper. It's here that the talking starts to loosen. Not in grand speeches, but in murmured Latin, butchered French, and a kind of half-German, used by half the delegates with varying degrees of accuracy. Because here's the secret. No one speaks the same language fluently. You settle into the corner of a smoky room in Münster where a Swedish diplomat is trying to express a complicated clause to a Spanish noble. The translator, sweating lightly, hesitates. Does binding agreement mean legally eternal or merely highly desirable? He picks something in between. Neither party notices, or maybe they pretend not to. Latin is supposed to be the common tongue, the language of educated Europe. But Latin is like an old violin now. Everyone plays it, but with different rhythms and broken strings. The French speak it like it's Italian. The Germans like it's Old Testament scripture. The Dutch stab at it like a bad joke. Even the papal envoys mix in so much local idiom that it might as well be Neapolitan pasta slang. So every conversation requires layers: the speaker, the translator, the listener, and often a second translator double-checking the first. You'd think this would slow things down. It does. But oddly, it also softens the edges. Harsh words lose their sting when filtered through clunky phrasing. Your prince's actions were dishonorable becomes, it is said your noble master may have misunderstood the appropriate forms. A gentle insult wrapped in silk and dropped like a feather. You follow one of the better translators, a Bohemian priest fluent in 5 languages, none of them native. He drifts from table to table, shifting tone and meaning with tiny adjustments. He is, in this moment, the most powerful man in the room. No one sees him. Everyone needs him. But not everyone's lucky. In Osnabrück, a Protestant delegate from Württemberg is locked in a muddled back and forth with a Danish envoy. They're trying to sort out whether a certain clause applies to duchies or only to kingdoms. The Latin word used, dominium, could mean either, or both, or neither. They argue for hours, then set it aside, then argue again. Language here is less about clarity and more about balance. Each word is a tightrope. Too precise, and someone will object. Too vague, and it becomes meaningless. You drift over pages being drafted by scribes who now measure sentences like architects measure bridges. Every clause must support weight. Every phrase must carry both meaning and ambiguity. Each state shall retain its rights. What rights? Exactly, that's the point. Ambiguity becomes the grease in this stiff machine. And so, some of the most important pieces of the treaty are written in phrases that can be interpreted 5 different ways. This is not an accident, it is an art. The goal isn't agreement, it's non-disagreement. You float into a smaller chamber in Münster where a Spanish delegate is dictating a message back to Madrid. He's frustrated. They do not understand, or they pretend not to. Either way, we are agreeing to something, but I'm not sure what. He laughs, not bitterly, just tired. He waves away the scribe and mutters, "At least we are talking." And that is something. That is everything. Back in Osnabrück, the Dutch are having their own troubles. They've been fighting the Spanish for 80 years and are now trying to end it with words. But which words? Can they be recognized as a republic? Will Spain ever put that in writing? The phrase status foederatus, federated state, is floated. It's vague enough to mean almost anything, or nothing. Perfect. You observe a Dutch translator shrugging as he scribbles it into a draft. Later, over a mug of beer, he jokes, "If everyone signs it and no one understands it, maybe that's how we win." Not everyone laughs, but no one argues. And so the talking continues, not in clarity but in rhythm. The translators become diplomats, the diplomats become poets. And the poets, well, they write footnotes for future arguments. And through all of this, the war quiets. Not entirely, not everywhere. But fewer letters carry orders to attack, more carry copies of proposed wording. It's not peace yet, but it's the shape of it. You close your eyes for a moment and let the languages swirl. Latin, French, High German, Low German, Swedish, Spanish, Italian, Dutch, Czech. They overlap, collide, dissolve into one long murmur. No one understands everything. But everyone is trying, and that, finally, is enough to keep the ink flowing. Section 8. The sound you follow now is hoofbeats, measured, methodical, sometimes hurried, but always moving. Horses, carriages, wagons, wheels grinding through rain-soaked mud or kicking up dust in sun-cracked lanes. This is the bloodstream of Westphalia now, its horse-powered messaging system. You drift behind one such rider, cloaked in wool, cap pulled low against the drizzle. In his pouch are 3 copies of a letter from Münster to Osnabrück. Identical, but each written in a different language. One for the Swedes, one for the Dutch, and one to archive. None are urgent, but they must still arrive quickly. That's the contradiction of peace. It must be done slowly, but communicated fast. There are no telegraphs, no typewriters, no reliable post. Just men on horseback with aching backs and memorized routes, riding from council to council, castle to chancellery, town to town, ferry to ferry, just to deliver the latest non-decision dressed up as diplomacy. And it's not just one rider. There are dozens, maybe hundreds, crisscrossing the region. Some carry messages between Münster and Osnabrück, the 2 twin hearts of this political beast. Others ride to Paris, Vienna, Stockholm, Madrid, The Hague or Rome. Every major move made here in Westphalia has to be cleared, endorsed, reworded, approved, and sometimes ignored by the home courts. And those courts are far away. That means every idea, no matter how minor, can take a month to circle back. A week to draft, a week to ride, a week to be debated, a week to return. That's assuming good weather, clear roads, and no broken wheel or dead horse along the way. You hover near a stable in Osnabrück. The staff know these routes better than the diplomats know their own titles. A young handler swaps saddles with mechanical efficiency. He doesn't care what the message says. He only knows it needs to be on the next horse by nightfall. If not, the Swedish envoy will shout again, and the shouting man tips well, so he does not argue. You pass by a carriage wobbling through a flooded road. Inside are 3 copies of the latest article draft, meticulously handwritten on parchment, sealed in tin to keep it dry. The courier has 2 pistols, not for show, but because paper this important is worth more than bread in some places. Along the road, you see a French courier bartering for oats. He's short on coin, but he offers a ring instead. "It's my brother's," he says, "but the message must arrive by morning." This is not glamorous work, but it is essential. Each piece of parchment passed along this route is another thread in the fabric of peace. It frays constantly. Bad translations, lost riders, delays, but they keep sewing. And inside the cities, this slow movement reshapes the rhythm of days. Every morning starts with the sound of hoofbeats. Every afternoon ends with messengers thudding into inns, shaking water off cloaks, handing over scrolls, and collapsing into benches while their horses are walked out back to drink. In the treaty halls, nothing moves without them. A Spanish bishop waits 2 weeks for instructions from Madrid, only to be told to stall. A Dutch merchant waits for word from Amsterdam about trade concessions. The reply is vague, so he writes again. and waits. You float into a Lutheran envoy's room where an exhausted assistant reads aloud the latest from Berlin. The message is 4 days old. "We agree in principle," it says, "but require clarification on the 6th clause regarding ecclesiastical restitution." He sighs. They'll need another courier, another round trip. A clerk walks in with a new map. The borders keep shifting, not because war is moving, but because new drafts of the treaty keep redrawing what's technically promised. The clerk shrugs. "I'll redraw it again next week." Even time begins to warp. Some proposals die, not because they're rejected, but because they take too long to return. By the time the response arrives, the conversation has moved on. And so, messages keep flowing, slow, heavy, unstoppable. They create their own kind of gravity. A rumor that France has agreed to a Dutch demand can shift the mood for a week, until the official word comes and says nothing of the kind. A whispered promise, carried on horseback, becomes gospel by the time it reaches the next town. You trail one final courier today. His horse limps slightly. The message in his pouch is not dramatic, just a simple note. "We will consider your compromise if Clause 22 is adjusted." It's not thrilling, but it's progress. Because even in this world of delay, fatigue, and ink-splattered parchment, that single word, consider, is gold. You close your eyes as the hooves fade behind you. Messages still ride, the world turns. And somewhere, across the Rhine, someone is waiting by candlelight to read a sentence that might bring a war closer to its end. Section 9. You find yourself now in the middle of a delegation's meeting room. One of dozens, all rented, borrowed, or hastily furnished across Münster and Osnabrück. The floors creak, the windows fog, and inside, yet another round of delegates has taken their seats, or rather, their assigned, debated, protocol-approved positions. Everyone here speaks for someone else, and often that someone else speaks for another someone entirely. You watch as a representative of the Elector of Saxony outlines a demand. But he's only here because the Elector couldn't be bothered to attend in person. The man taking notes beside him is technically from Brandenburg, but he's been instructed to act as a shadow liaison for a cousin in Silesia. Across the table, a Bohemian baron folds his arms. He was sent not by the emperor, but by the emperor's third cousin, acting in spiritual authority. If that sounds confusing, it is. But confusion here is a diplomatic tool. In Westphalia, no one wants full responsibility. Every word spoken must be deniable, delayed, or diluted. The real power rarely sits in the room. It hovers, waits, corrects from afar. What you see are proxies. You float past a French cardinal dictating a message to a scribe. He's annoyed. Paris has sent conflicting instructions again. The Queen Regent wants firmness, but Mazarin advises flexibility. So the cardinal does what most do here. He crafts a statement vague enough to satisfy both, knowing full well neither will be happy. Nearby, the Swedish delegation meets by candlelight. Their head diplomat has gout and refuses to attend meetings before midday. His secretary reads him updates aloud while he soaks his feet. Each proposal is picked apart, but decisions are few. Every reply requires approval from Stockholm, which takes weeks. In the meantime, his staff passes time debating clause punctuation and hunting for decent wine. This is not chaos, it's structure. Just not the fast kind. Even the Holy Roman Emperor, supposedly one of the central powers in the talks, has sent envoys who lack full authority. Every time they reach a compromise, they must write back to Vienna. Then wait. Then stall. If the emperor doesn't like the terms, the process resets. And he's not the only one. The Dutch delegates must coordinate with 7 independent provinces, each with its own council, interests, and veto power. One province agrees to a trade clause, another province rejects it the next day. And the delegates, they just nod, draft another version, and pretend momentum still exists. You drift into an antechamber in Osnabrück where a Spanish noble scowls at a list of names. "Who's this bishop representing again?" he mutters. No one's sure. Possibly Bavaria, possibly Cologne, possibly just himself. The noble shrugs and adds the name to his list of people to ignore diplomatically. This is what happens when too many rulers send too many underlings to say too many maybe statements. Every proposal is filtered through chains of command so long, so tangled, that by the time a reply returns, the moment has passed. But no one complains, because it gives everyone the space to maneuver or to hide. You begin to see the wisdom in it. By fragmenting responsibility, the delegations create room for ideas to circulate without immediate consequences. An envoy can say, "We're open to that," while his ruler has deniability. If the idea is popular, they move forward. If it causes offense, they blame the language barrier, or the translator, or the weather. And so, nothing is said directly, but everything is communicated. You catch a conversation between two minor princes from Thuringia and Hesse. They speak in guarded phrases. There is some interest in modifying the fourth clause, of course, provided the interpretation remains as understood. Naturally, we wouldn't want to disrupt the balance already hinted at. Precisely. Let us inform our respective advisors. They smile, shake hands. They've said nothing. But both leave believing the other has agreed to a compromise. That's diplomacy in Westphalia. You hover now near a massive scroll pinned to the wall in Münster. It's a chart showing who's representing whom, who reports to whom, and which envoys have actual authority. Red ink denotes uncertain roles. Half the page is red. One scribe jokes, "It would be easier to chart a fish market." And yet somehow, slowly, the maze starts to form pathways. Some envoys build trust, some back channels open, some minor points get resolved because neither side thinks the issue important enough to escalate. These small settlements become precedent. You follow a Dutch clerk compiling a list of settled clauses. 6 articles, not binding, not final, but agreed upon, at least for now. He pins the list to a post. Later that day, a Swedish scribe copies it into their records. A week later, the Spanish delegate references it in conversation. That's how decisions happen here, not through bold declarations, but slow sediment. A phrase here, a nod there. One minor approval layered on another until the shape of peace starts to form. Not finished, not clean, but finally beginning. Section 10. You linger now in the lull, the long drawn-out waiting game where time moves, but just barely. In the spaces between courier arrivals, between reply letters, between tea gone cold and candles half melted, nothing really happens. And yet everything depends on this. You drift through a hallway in Münster where no one's speaking above a whisper. Not because of secrecy, just exhaustion. A papal assistant yawns openly while copying the same clause for the 4th time that day. He doesn't question it. This is the rhythm now. Nothing moves except the pigeons. You spot them on rooftops, waddling between chimneys and coop windows. They've become background noise, but they're also faster than couriers. A few diplomats, mostly the ones less bound by formality, have taken to sending brief messages by pigeon. Informal, technically improper, but efficient. A good pigeon can cut 3 days off a diplomatic lag. But most still rely on the long route, ink, horse, waiting. You float into a Protestant meeting chamber in Osnabrück. It's empty, except for one sleepy scribe and a flickering stove. The meeting was scheduled for today, but the French have not replied. The Swedes are still redrafting a paragraph. The imperial delegation insists they must wait for Vienna's word. So they sit, or they don't. The scribe writes one line in the record, "Session postponed," awaiting further clarification. You follow a minor envoy from the Prince Bishopric of Trier as he walks laps around the courtyard for the 5th time this morning. He's written 6 letters in 10 days. Only one has gotten a reply. The rest? Maybe lost, maybe ignored, maybe just too dull to demand urgency. This is not an exception. This is the pattern. There are rooms filled with silence, corridors filled with quiet rustling. The sound of nibs scratching parchment is the closest thing to conversation. It's here, in these gaps, that minds wander. You peek into a delegate's journal, filled with doodles, nonsense Latin jokes, reflections on home. He misses his garden, his dog. He wonders if the innkeeper's daughter likes him or is just polite. He ends the entry with, "No word today." Again. Some begin side projects. One Swedish assistant is translating a French cookbook. A Dutch merchant draws a map of Europe using only food metaphors. Spain is bread, dense and crumbly. Sweden is dried fish. France is overripe cheese, but still charming. In another building, a clergyman spends 4 hours discussing theology with a Calvinist counterpart. Not because it's useful, but because they're the only two who actually enjoy the conversation. Even nature slows to match the pace. You pass trees barely shaking in the breeze. Markets that close early because there's nothing left to sell to foreign guests who already bought all the good wine. Locals have developed a polite tolerance for the delegates. But the novelty wore off months ago. And yet, for all the idleness, this quiet is not wasted. Because beneath it, tension softens. People become used to one another. Familiarity dulls suspicion. That Swedish envoy who refused to be in the same room as the Spaniard. He now nods when they pass in the hall. The French cardinal who once insisted on an armed escort. He walks alone now, albeit dramatically. You drift over a garden where 2 mid-ranking envoys from opposing factions play chess. Neither is very good. The game drags. But they return every afternoon, not to win, just to keep something moving. In the stables, a courier laughs as he helps a rival's assistant lift a crate. They share jokes in broken Latin. They've both been here too long to care about side loyalty. They care more about clean boots and dry cloaks. You pass a Lutheran pastor writing a sermon he knows won't be heard for weeks. Still, he writes. Because in this strange pause, people crave routine. Ritual, a reason to mark the day. And so even as decisions stall, relationships form. Even as time crawls, trust inches forward. You hear less shouting now in the council halls, more sighing, more patience, more people asking when instead of why. Because when nothing moves, the war feels very far away. And that distance, soft, dull, unthreatening, becomes its own kind of peace. Not official, not on parchment, but real in its own quiet way. Even the pigeons seem to relax. Less flutter, more stillness. You close your eyes in this space between movements. Nothing urgent, nothing breaking. Just the slow, heavy stillness of a piece not yet written, but already felt. Section 11. Now you slip through doors left slightly ajar where the real negotiations happen, not the ones in the grand halls under oil paintings and chandeliers, but the ones that don't exist on any official record. Not yet. This is the hour of quiet understandings, of side conversations, shared glances, and off-the-book dinners between enemies who claim to despise each other during daylight hours, but sit shoulder to shoulder after dark with wine-stained hands and half-truths on their tongues. You find 2 delegates, one French, one Imperial, sharing bread at an unremarkable inn halfway between Münster and Osnabrück. Officially, they're not allowed to meet, but officially has long since stopped being a real barrier. They speak in circles. One says, suppose your side were to soften its stance on ecclesiastical lands. The other answers, suppose your allies were to recognize imperial authority over the northern bishoprics. It's all wrapped in hypotheticals, but they both know the conversation is very real. These secret negotiations are where progress is made, not loudly, not cleanly, but efficiently. Because in these rooms, people speak plainly. No translators, no scribes. Just weary men tired of stalling and cautiously willing to give ground, provided they get something in return. You pass through another gathering, a Dutch merchant hosting a small supper with delegates from multiple Protestant states. There's no formal agenda, just fish stew, dark beer, and the occasional mention of customs tariffs. But slowly, trade demands become suggestions. Suggestions become clauses. Clauses become drafts. Outside, the official delegations remain locked in ceremony, still arguing about titles, about who bows to whom. But inside these back rooms, progress tiptoes forward. You trail a papal emissary as he visits a Swedish assistant late at night. It's not a meeting, they insist. It's a courtesy visit. And yet they leave the room with a rough outline of a clause both sides are likely to approve. An agreement on religious toleration that weeks later will appear in a draft, with no explanation of where it came from. And why does this work? Because in secret, no one loses face. They don't have to announce compromise. They don't have to make speeches defending it. They just have to nod once, privately, and then let the official machinery catch up. Even the translators get in on it. One clever man, fluent in Latin and gossip, floats between sides, quietly smoothing language in both directions. He knows what phrases cause trouble. He knows how to phrase, "We reject this," as "we are not yet prepared to accept." That buys time. Time is gold. Sometimes silence is the biggest gift. A Spanish envoy spends an hour not asking a Dutch representative whether independence will be recognized. And the Dutchman spends the same hour not asking if Spanish troops will fully withdraw. At the end of the hour, both men leave satisfied that something has changed, even if nothing was said. There are also rumors, small ones, some planted, some true. A French delegate lets it slip intentionally that his government is considering support for a particular trade corridor. Within days, that corridor appears on 3 separate proposals. This is negotiation by implication. By the time anything appears in the official record, it's already been discussed in the unofficial rooms, whispered in stairwells, teased over tea, and drafted twice. You float over a hallway where 2 young assistants cross paths every morning at the same time. One from Brandenburg, one from Bavaria. They always nod, say nothing. Then one day one says, "We might be ready to give on clause 26. No context, no follow-up. 3 days later the clause is revised. It's like diplomacy has found a quiet rhythm outside the spotlight. These unofficial meetings work because they are unofficial. They don't carry the burden of protocol. They're fueled not by pressure, but by fatigue, shared bread, and a flicker of mutual understanding. They don't resolve everything. Not yet. But they resolve enough. Enough that when the official envoys finally return to the table with edited drafts and slightly softened tones, no one is surprised. They just pretend the idea appeared out of the blue. You return to one such table now, in Münster. The delegates are reviewing a revised clause. No one admits who proposed the changes. No one asks. They read, they grunt, they agree to provisionally accept. Which, in Westphalia, is as close to consensus as you're going to get. And outside the room, a pair of envoys nod politely as they pass. One Catholic, one Protestant. Neither smiles, but both know they shared a bottle the night before, and that bottle may have just shortened this war by a few weeks. You follow their footsteps down the corridor, not fast, not loud, but moving forward all the same. Section 12. You hover now over a heavy oak table, thick, stained and scarred from years of ink and elbows. It groans under the weight of documents stacked in uneven piles, parchment curled at the edges, wax seals cracked or soft with age. This is where the words that will end the war are beginning to settle. The final treaty is not one document. It's many, dozens, hundreds, clauses upon clauses, agreements, exceptions, footnotes, preambles, and addenda. The paperwork alone is enough to make a scribe weep, and some do. You follow one of them now, sleeves rolled, fingers blackened from ink, copying Article 47 for the 5th time. Not because he made an error, but because a cardinal inserted a new phrase. Without prejudice to existing privileges. Innocuous. Maybe, maybe not. But now it must be rewritten, recirculated, reviewed. Every clause is like that. Nothing is ever final until every faction has approved every word. And they all want their fingerprints on it. You scan one section detailing religious rights. The Protestants demand guarantees. Public worship, church governance, property. The Catholics insist on wording that suggests they are permitting it, never conceding. So the clause becomes a masterpiece of ambiguity. Each state, according to its own conscience and prior settlement, shall maintain the practice of its confession as hitherto tolerated. Tolerated by whom? Hitherto defined by what? Doesn't matter. Both sides nod. That's the point. Other sections are even more convoluted. There are passages on land restitution. Do former owners get their estates back? What about tenants who've held them for 20 years? What if the original owner is dead and his cousin married into another house, which is now under Spanish protection? You drift through the debates, watching diplomats untangle these lines like knots in old rope. Sometimes they succeed. More often, they simply cover the knot with velvet ribbon and move on. The signature pages grow with every passing week. Some envoys insist on their full titles, entire paragraphs of honorifics. Others add symbolic flourishes, wax stamps bearing coats of arms, religious symbols, even dried flowers. And it's not just vanity. In a world where enforcement is uncertain and trust is minimal, symbolism matters. A wax seal isn't just decor, it's a threat. Break this promise, and you break the honor of the man who signed it. And in 17th century Europe, honor still carries weight. You move past a group of clerks bent over a draft treaty for the Dutch-Spanish negotiations. Their war predates the 30 Years' War, but this peace must settle both. The Spanish will formally recognize Dutch independence, a momentous act, but only if the wording is delicate enough to avoid appearing like a surrender. So they choose phrasing like, "The King of Spain acknowledges the state of affairs as presently constituted." Not independence, just the state of affairs. The Dutch nod anyway. It's close enough. Words matter, but peace matters more. In the next room, a translator reads aloud a French revision of the border articles. 2 lines of text, 6 different interpretations. One suggests territory A goes to France. Another implies it remains in imperial hands. The delegates argue over commas. One cardinal insists a semicolon is being used deceptively. And still, the drafts grow. You pause beside a Swedish officer helping his envoy review a land clause involving the bishopric of Bremen. He's not a diplomat, he's a soldier. But he's here to ensure that what was won on the battlefield isn't lost on paper. He points to a section and says, "If we give them this line, they'll move troops next spring." The diplomat nods and deletes the sentence. This is how war ends, not with cheers, but with redacted phrases. You float now above the master ledger, kept under lock in a back room in Münster. Every article, as it's approved, is copied here by senior scribes. The book is enormous, bound in leather, riveted with brass, too heavy for one man to carry. It is not yet complete, but it's close. So close that delegates begin to speak in hopeful tones. So close that couriers no longer carry desperate pleas for delay, but careful instructions for final positions. There's a silence that settles now. Not awkward, not lazy, but anticipatory, as if everyone can feel the war relaxing its grip, loosening the knots it's tied in minds and maps. You follow the final edits now. A clause is added promising that no prince will interfere in another's internal religion. Another ensures free navigation of the Rhine. Another restores lands to certain bishoprics as recognized in the year of grace 1624. A compromise date, chosen not because it's fair, but because it's possible. Nothing in this treaty is perfect. But perfection was never the goal. The goal was to stop the dying. You settle one last time beside a table where an elderly scribe dips his quill and writes, "Let it be known that peace is agreed upon by all present parties, under the terms herein described." He pauses, then keeps writing. There are still signatures to gather, translations to finalize, copies to send. But the skeleton is there now, the structure that will hold this fragile piece together. And for the first time in decades, the war has no more clauses left to justify itself. Just names, ink, and the weight of 30 years about to rest. Section 13. You drift now through a corridor that feels different. Not busier, not louder, just lighter. The war is still out there, technically. Soldiers still march, cannons still sit quietly in the damp, but here in Westphalia, something has shifted. People talk less about if, more about when. Because finally, enough has been agreed to start believing in an ending. You pass through Münster first, where a French diplomat stands on a small balcony in the early morning, arms folded, face unreadable. Below him, children run past with baskets. The war never made much sense to them, and they don't care about treaties. But they know that people have stopped dying in nearby fields. They know bread is more plentiful now. And so they run. Inside, a Spanish cardinal finishes reviewing the final language of a territorial clause. He makes one change, a single word. Then he sets the paper aside and tells the scribe, "Send it." You cross to Osnabrück, where Protestant envoys begin receiving final confirmations. The Swedes have accepted a key trade provision. The Dutch are satisfied with the language around religious tolerance. Even Brandenburg has signed off. Reluctantly, but definitely. You watch as the Holy Roman Emperor's representative places a draft on the central table. Everyone knows it's symbolic, not final. The real copy will be bound and sealed. But still, the act of laying it down causes something strange to happen. No one objects. That silence is louder than any speech, and yet even now not everyone is satisfied. The Pope, displeased with some concessions to Protestants, has withdrawn his blessing. His envoy leaves without signing. The papal chair at the negotiation table remains empty, a quiet protest. But the treaty moves forward anyway. You hover beside a Dutch clerk ticking names off a long list of signatories. There are many, too many, some representing countries, some representing duchies, bishoprics, counties, cities. The treaty must reflect the shape of the Holy Roman Empire, not as one state, but as 1,000 overlapping claims pretending to be one. Each signatory wants a copy. Some want copies in Latin, others in French or German. Some want seals pressed in red wax, others in black. There are arguments about ink color, parchment texture, and whose name should appear first in the index. You'd think these details would cause delays, and they do. But the delays feel different now, like fidgeting during a wedding rehearsal. The ceremony is going to happen. Everyone knows it. They just want their name spelled correctly on the invitation. Meanwhile, armies on the edges of Europe begin to move, but not toward battle. French troops start packing to leave Alsace. The Swedes quietly prepare to evacuate certain towns in Bohemia. There's no official announcement yet. But the generals see which way the wind is blowing. They fought too long to be surprised by peace. You float above a Protestant preacher delivering a sermon in a half-collapsed church. He quotes no scripture. Instead, he talks about rain returning to the fields, about barns that might be rebuilt, about mothers who will stop lighting candles for sons who haven't come home. He says nothing about treaties, but everyone in the pews understands what he means. Even the air feels different. In one back room, a Jesuit and a Calvinist translator share a bottle of wine to celebrate the final translation draft. They don't toast. That would be too much. But they smile, awkwardly, honestly. Elsewhere, a courier returns from Vienna with no objections to the final imperial text. His horse is spent, his hands shake, but he laughs. No edits, he says. They're tired. That's the real victory here. Not triumph, not revenge, just exhaustion. Mutual, shared, total. And so the final pieces fall into place. The Catholic and Protestant powers agree on the critical point. Each prince may determine the religion of his state, and no one may interfere. A principle not of unity, but of tolerance through distance. It's not justice, but it's survivable. You visit the final drafting room where the clerk writes out the full treaty in Latin, French, and German. The candles flicker. He sharpens his quill. Outside, rain taps gently on the windows, unbothered, neutral, constant. He writes, "Let peace be observed and preserved faithfully and sincerely." He does not pause. He's written it too many times to reflect. You pause instead, watching, because the words may be ceremonial, but the impact is real. This peace may not be perfect. It may not heal the land. It may not bring back the dead, or reverse the famine, or unburn the cities. But it will stop the bleeding. That's enough. You drift upward, slow and silent, as the final pages are signed in turn. Wax melts, seals press, names are written with slow dignity. And just like that, after 30 years, the ink dries. Section 14. The ink is dry, but the work isn't done, not even close. You drift now into the long wooden corridors of bureaucracy, slower than any battlefield, thicker than any fog. Because a treaty signed is not a treaty kept, not until it's been copied, sealed, sent, and read by the people who didn't get a seat at the table. You pass into the scribe chambers again. They're brighter now, lamps burning long into the night, the sound of quills moving with renewed urgency. Dozens of clerks bend over parchment, copying the treaty again and again. One in Latin, one in German, one in French. Each language version must match, line by line, clause by clause. They argue over terms, not in anger, just exhaustion. Does this phrase in French imply ownership or stewardship? In Latin, it could mean either. Then write it as both. Compromise through duplication. You follow a group of junior clerks assigned to carry the bound volumes from Münster's archive room to the waiting envoys. Each set is wrapped in cloth, tied with cord, wax sealed shut. Not just a document, but a symbol. This is the peace. This is yours now. Guard it. The envoys receive them solemnly. Some kiss the seals, others tuck them under arm like fragile children. Most look too tired to celebrate, and then begins the next step. Distribution. You drift to the stables. Couriers ready their horses, loading bags full of documents. Not just 1 or 2 copies, dozens. Every principality, every duchy, every city that signed, every monarch who had a hand in the war, they all get one. No one is exempt. A map is unrolled on a barn wall. Red lines trace courier paths to Vienna, to Stockholm, to Madrid, Paris, Amsterdam, Zurich, Warsaw. It looks like the arteries of a great and exhausted heart, trying to pump peace across a continent that's still twitching from war. You ride along with the first team headed to Vienna. The courier doesn't sleep. He reads the treaty by firelight during rest breaks, mouthing the words as if trying to understand their weight. Near Mainz, the roads are flooded. The courier's cart gets stuck. He abandons it, slings the treaty case over his shoulder, and walks 12 miles through the mud. The war may be over, but the land still resists. Another courier, bound for Paris, is stopped at a border checkpoint. The guards question him for hours. He shows them the treaty. They laugh. "We'll believe it when it holds," one says. But they let him through. You pause in a Lutheran church where the preacher reads from a letter, not the treaty itself, just a summary. It's enough. The people listen. Some cry. One old man mutters, "Maybe my grandson will never learn to hold a sword." Back in Westphalia, copies continue to pour out. The Dutch request additional versions to send to their trading partners. The Swiss ask for confirmation that their neutrality has been preserved. The Pope, still unimpressed, refuses a copy outright. Not everyone rejoices. In a castle outside Munich, a minor noble scowls at the treaty. "We lost 3 provinces," he says. "And for what? So France and Sweden could redraw our border while pretending to tolerate us." He crumples one draft and throws it into the fire. The rest he locks in a chest. But even he doesn't break the peace. Because behind the politics, a deeper fatigue lingers. Not political exhaustion, but human weariness. Most have simply had enough. In the countryside, people begin rebuilding. Not because of any order, but because the quiet has lasted long enough to believe in. Farmers patch roofs, merchants reopen shutters. A midwife in Westphalia hums while preparing herbs. She hasn't heard cannon in over a year. The war isn't forgotten, but it's no longer the defining sound of life. You slip into a school where children recite names of cities: Prague, Magdeburg, Osnabrück, Münster. Not as battlefields now, but as places where things were decided. Places that ended something. Even the air carries less weight. You hover one last time in the chamber where the treaty was signed. The chairs are empty. Dust is already gathering in corners. The great scrolls have been removed. The banners rolled up. What remains is the ghost of an ending, but also the beginning of something else. The war lasted 30 years. The peace took 5 years to negotiate, and now it will take generations to live with. But still, it has begun, and that is enough. Section 15. You drift now into a Europe that is still itself, fractured, proud, suspicious, but somehow also quieter. The guns are silent, the camps are thinning. The messengers carry news of treaties, not troop movements. And in the stillness, something strange begins to happen. People start planning. Not war, not revenge, but life. In the Dutch Republic, merchants draft new shipping routes. They argue not about fortifications, but tariffs. Peace means trade, and trade means rebuilding. You follow a sea captain, mapping new ports on parchment. "Spain recognizes us now," he mutters. "That means better insurance." In the Swedish court, advisors tally what the war earned them: territories, titles, recognition. Not everything they hoped for, but enough. More importantly, their envoys returned home alive. That too is counted. You slip past a monastery in southern Germany where monks ring bells again, not for warning, but for prayer. For the first time in decades, the bells are not answered by marching feet. Not everyone is satisfied. The treaty leaves wounds open, unresolved claims, unanswered crimes. Some border towns will change flags again in a few years. Some rulers already regret what they signed. There are whispers, small, nervous, worried, that maybe this peace won't last. But they're just whispers. And for now, that's all they are. You drift past university halls where young students read from fresh manuscripts. They study not war tactics, but law, philosophy, diplomacy. The Treaty of Westphalia is being copied into legal records. Professors underline phrases that will echo for centuries. Cuius regio, eius religio. Each state shall have sovereign equality. Words that will shape the modern idea of the nation-state, of borders as legal facts, of diplomacy as craft, not concession. In ways subtle and vast, this treaty begins rewriting the rules of Europe, not perfectly, not peacefully, not forever, but undeniably. You find yourself floating now above a small village in the Alsace, one that passed from imperial to French hands with the stroke of a quill. The people don't cheer or riot. They repaint the sign above the town hall. They change the prayer in church quietly. Life resumes. One boy standing barefoot in a field asks his father, "Will there be another war soon?" The father thinks, then answers, "Not this year." You pass through the ruins of Magdeburg, still scorched, still raw, but scaffolding is going up. A mason taps stone into place, shaping walls that might stand for a century or collapse again within a generation. He doesn't know. He builds anyway. You move with the wind over rivers that no longer carry troop transports, over forests no longer hiding deserters, over roads now echoing with carts full of lumber, grain, cloth, supplies not for armies, but for towns trying to stitch themselves back together. Back in Westphalia, the delegations have left. The guest houses are empty, inns clean out cellars. Locals swap stories about the strange foreigners who lived among them, who argued about clauses, who bowed too deeply or not enough. Some are missed, most are forgotten, but the treaty remains, tucked in archives, bound in leather, filed in courts, and more importantly, copied into memory, into habit. You watch a Prussian noble sign a trade agreement with a Bohemian counterpart. Nothing grand, just a small exchange of grain for cloth. But neither side brings soldiers, they bring pens. That's the legacy, not peace everlasting, but the possibility of negotiation as a better option than war. A world where dialogue, even tedious, infuriating, pedantic dialogue, wins out over fire. You see it again and again, in a carriage dispatch carrying grain instead of cannonballs, in a letter from Vienna requesting clarification, not retribution, in the way towns begin keeping census again, marking lives not lost but counted. And you float now into a higher silence, the kind that follows not tragedy but completion, the kind that doesn't beg for attention, only acknowledgement. The war is over, not ended in glory nor in justice, but in agreement. And for Europe, broken and stitched together by hand, that will have to be enough. And now you let go of it. Let the names fade. The princes, the clauses, the parchment weighed with dust. Let the voices fall quiet, the cardinals arguing over phrases, the couriers whispering in stables, the scribes gently dozing over open ink pots. There is nothing more to carry. The war has ended, the treaty is signed, the work is over. The candlelight softens around you, the corridors grow still. The cobblestones of Münster and Osnabrück are empty now, brushed only by the breeze. No more processions, no more clipped footsteps of diplomats rehearsing their next phrase. Just the quiet rhythm of cities returning to sleep. You follow the breeze. It carries you past rivers now calm, hills now green, fields waiting to be ploughed not by marching boots, but by barefoot farmers at first light. The peace is not perfect, it never was. But it holds, like a hand on your shoulder, steady, tired, warm. Let your thoughts quiet now. You've walked far through history. You've heard enough debate, seen enough ink, followed enough messengers into the fog. There is nothing more you need to understand. Only this: things end. Even the long, long wars, even the deepest noise. And when they do, the world does not celebrate, it exhales. So do the same. Breathe in slow, feel the chill of old stone walls and the soft creak of floorboards beneath your feet. Breathe out slower, let it all settle. Let your mind step back from the halls of Westphalia. Let the parchment roll shut. Let the bells of distant towns ring gently, not in alarm, but in time. The night holds you now. Let it.